So I have this friend. I was trying to convince him to play D&D with me, and he asked a question that I've heard a lot over my time playing D&D, and that was, is D&D a board game? And I said, no, not really, but it can be played on a board. In fact, it can be played on a lot of things. So let's talk about those. When I first started playing D&D, all we had was the theater of the mind. It was you had to imagine everything. And when you're playing with little kids like I was playing with my kids and some uncles and cousins and things like that. It was very difficult for them to imagine what was going on, so they lost interest really fast. And so I quickly learned that I needed to make it more real for them. And that started with getting my brother, who had a printer at that time, to print me some miniatures. Now I had these miniatures, and they could see their character, but that wasn't enough. They needed to know where they were going. They needed to know what they were, investigating. That first goblin cave that we went into. I did my best to draw it out for them, but even then it was a little hard. And so I decided, well, let's make some terrain. Let's bring this to life if we can. And so I made some dungeon tiles, and we're going to go over those. I made some dungeon tiles. Then when I got my own printer, I started 3D printing dungeon tiles, and just kind of slowly my tabletop game has evolved, and you'll kind of get to see that process with me as we go over them today. The first thing that I want to talk about is something very simple that anyone can get their hands on, anyone can get access to. This is a piece of fabric that I bought at Joann's. And basically, it's like a fake leather material. It rolls, it bends, it's pretty durable, really cool material. And I was able to buy a 7-foot piece of this by 3 feet for about $7. And then I got out my yardstick, I got out my Sharpie, and I made the grid system, which is fantastic. It's easy to use. You can take it wherever you want. You just roll it up and throw it in your bag. I mean, obviously it's got little creases and stuff in it, but with time, those go away. And once you put things on it, you can't even tell they're there. Now, when you're playing D&D, your characters generally move in 5-foot increments. 5 foot here, 5 foot here. And what you would do is you would take your miniatures and just use this grid system to put out how big a room is or something like that. And the beauty of this is that you can use any material that you want on top of it. You can use pieces of wood, little sticks or rocks or whatever you want to make the map. This is just the grid to put your map on top of. And then you can put whatever you want on this to bring your world to life. You can be as detailed as you want to be or as little as you want. And, if you're like me and you're a traveling DM, then you're going places. And just being able to unroll this and throw some, here's your dungeon, throw some sticks on it, throw pieces of cardboard, whatever you want. It's simple, it's easy, it's cheap, and it's a fantastic method if you're just starting out and you're not sure if this is something you want to invest in too much. So like I was saying, you can use sticks, you can use cardboard, you can use whatever you want. What I prefer to use are walls. And if you go online, you go to Thingiverse, you can find files for these. These are simple 3D printable walls that have a little locking system that allows you to take 2 or 3 of these and put them together in whatever way or shape that you want. If you want to have bends or curves, you can have those. With 3D printing, the thing you're always going to be thinking about is, do I have enough filament? Do I have enough resin? Whatever you're printing with. And the thing I love about these walls is that they are very minimalist, right? It doesn't take a lot to make a wall. You can print them in a ton of different styles. Right here we just have your standard brick that you would use, in some kind of dungeon. You can also print them out in rock or cobblestone. There's wood. There's all sorts of different ones. All you have to do is go to Thingiverse and type in, D&D walls or dungeon tiles, and you'll be able to find all sorts of things. These I like because they're quick to put together. You can set them up, have it however you want your dungeon to be, and then slowly guide your team into that dungeon. You can print off small door frames and things like that, so that people know exactly where they're going. If you want, you can have the big door frame for your big boss to be behind, different things like that. There's just a lot that you can do with the walls, and they're freeform. You can throw a bunch of them in a bag, take them wherever you want, and with 5-10 minutes, you can build the dungeon wherever you are. If you're at your home, I mean, obviously you can spend a lot of time building it up and dropping little bits of terrain here and there, or whatever, like bookcases or treasure chests or whatever you want to be in there. But if you're on the go, it's nice to be able to just grab your mat, grab your bag of dungeon walls, and head out. If you're looking to 3D print tiles for playing D&D or whatever war game or whatever tabletop game you want to play, you're going to find interlocking tiles. And what those are tiles like this that you can print out in different forms with walls, and they usually come with a base on them. And the base will be gridded out to just like that grid on the mat I had before. You will play with this grid instead, and this allows you to print out the entire dungeon in a set material, which is kind of cool. Different dungeon tiles will have different interlocking systems. This is the first one that I started to print. And the reason I started to print these is because they were smaller. They didn't use a ton of filament. One of these tiles, I could print pretty quickly, and they did what I wanted them to do. After playing with them for a while, you see that the grid system uses these small little pegs with circles on either side to just fit down into the grid. And sometimes they fit in perfect, sometimes they squeeze, take a minute to go in there. But using those, you can interlock the tiles together, and now you have your piece. The problem is that most of the time they don't fit together so tightly. And so players will move things, move their figures, and when they do that, the pieces will come apart. Like this one is much looser, you can see that. And you can glue them, you can do different things to fix them. I loved these to begin with, just because, like I said, for one roll of filament, I could print out probably half of a dungeon. And for some people, it's worth it to have that physical dungeon out on the table in front of them. They know exactly where they can go, where the rooms are, and things like that, and they love that. And I liked giving that to them, but like I said, it just became one of those things that was a little hard to move around with, because stuff would just break and fall apart and things like that. And so I moved on from these to the Loctite dungeon tiles. Okay, and what the Loctites look like are this. Basically, same thing, you got your grid pieces, but they come apart, and they have these grids on the sides that you use these locking mechanisms, and the locks come in different shapes, different sizes, and you can build just about anything. And there are a ton of these online for free. This is actually part of a spaceship that I bought, that is a modular spaceship that you can take apart and build, and it has different floors, different doors, all sorts of things. And basically, you print them out, put the pieces in, and they stay secure. It's tight. These are the majority of what you'll see. And if you ever buy a Patreon, a lot of the Patreons that you buy will come with tiles as well. I bought a set of dungeon tiles, or not even dungeon tiles, I bought a set of miniatures from Epic Minis that were about demons. And with it came demonic tiles, portals, things like that. So not only did I get all the demon figures to print out, I also received the tiles to make that world, to make that dungeon session. And to me, that was huge. It was a big deal. Is it time consuming? Oh yeah, it's incredibly time consuming. But once you have all the tiles printed out, you can use them over and over again for different settings, for however you want your next dungeon run to be. If you want to do a one-shot, you can do a one-shot. You can do a bunch of different things with these tiles, and so it's cool to have a generic set. I don't suggest printing out tiles for everything unless that's your thing, unless that's what you want to do. I would print out, a set of dungeon tiles, a set of forest, or, stone, or something like that, just something that you can use over and over again, because yeah, this is a dungeon, but it can also be a sewer. It can also be the inside of a tavern. It could be a basement. It could be a catacomb. It could be a lot of things. So I choose to print things that can be used in a lot of different areas. Except for the spaceship. I printed a giant spaceship, so I'm going to print an interior that is spaceship for it because that's what I like. Okay, now moving away from 3D printed terrain, terrain itself is pretty easy to make. Before I even had a 3D printer, when I was playing D&D, I wanted to have, you know, some durable terrain. And I stumbled across a channel for Black Magic Craft. Black Magic Craft is awesome. He shows you how to make tons of things, but right when I was looking into it, he came out with a video about making these durable dungeon tiles. And so I don't want to steal anything from him. For a detailed how to make these, I'll put a link to his channel below. And I mean, if you want to make anything D&D related, he's awesome. He's amazing. Just watch his videos. He'll show you how to make just about everything. But I made these tiles, and what these are made out of is actually a piece of poster board that you can buy at, you know, Walmart or wherever it is. It's just a foam-filled poster board. It was like $3 for an entire, you know, 2-foot by 3-foot piece. And you get that, you cut it into the size, whatever size you want it to be. Again, I was trying to stick to the grid, as you can see from my little segments here, the little 5-foot areas for D&D. And basically what I did was I took styrofoam plates and I cut them into different patterns, different little things, and I kept them in a grid. You know, I put a grid into my plate, I cut it all out, and then I glued them down. Now, paper plates don't usually have texture to them, and so I used one of my favorite tools for creating terrain, and that is this. An aluminum ball. I mean, that's what this is. It's just a ball of tinfoil that I rolled up, and you just roll it over the top. You just roll it over whatever you want to give it that texture, and then when you paint it, the texture really comes out of it, and it looks worn, it looks dented, it looks cracked, it looks perfect. And so I glued my smashed with aluminum styrofoam plate onto the poster board, and I painted it black. And I went over the top of it with like a varnish, a matte varnish spray. The sides, I want them to make it look a little bit nicer, and these are just coffee sticks, coffee stirrers that you can get from about anywhere, and I just glued them onto the sides. And I thought that these were really cool. Originally, I would travel around with just these, with 4 of these, you know, and I mean that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 30-foot by, or sorry, 60-foot when you have all of them. It's a 60 by 60 room, which is enormous. And so I could do most of my encounters just on top of these tiles, and I just had to be creative. After making these and seeing how cool they turned out, I thought, well, I can make more things, you know, and I dabbled with making my own river tiles. And basically what these are is just that same poster board that we used for this, painted blue, and then I went over the top with hot glue to give it that texture, that, you know, water-like texture. And is it perfect? No. But for what I was doing, it worked out amazing. My wife brought home some of these cutout pieces, and I put them on the bottom of it. Not for really any reason or purpose. You know, they're too small, as you can see, compared to these other ones for a full-size miniature to sit on top of and be your 5x5 grid. But, you know, they just looked nice to me. And again, I did those coffee sticks on the side to make them look neat, and they are durable. These things have lasted for years, traveled with me, and I've used them many, many times. But this was time consuming. It took forever to cut out the little pieces of the styrofoam plates. I mean, this was hours to make these. Do they look great? Are they durable? Yes. Are they time efficient? No, not at all. But for time efficient, we'll move on to the next tiles that we're going to talk about. And those are, simply put, styrofoam tiles. And they look like this. You can cut them in any shape. They come from the pink insulation foam that people will put in like houses, things like that. In certain areas, you can find them in 1/2-inch pieces. I could not find them in 1/2 inch, so everything I did was a full inch, which is nice because, I mean, they're crazy durable, but they are a nightmare to cut out, as you can see from right here where I had to cut them from the top and then again from the bottom, and sometimes it didn't quite meet up. But these take minutes to make, you know, and it doesn't matter if you're making one this size or if you're making one this size. You know, you know, just to kind of help you along, we're going to talk about how to make these as well. So the reason that I want to talk about making these tiles is because when I first started designing, first started building things for tabletop gaming, this was my first big purchase. I bought an entire sheet of this material, and you can get it at Home Depot, you can get it at Lowe's, wherever, you know, whatever hardware store you have, you can usually find something like this. Again, if you can get it thicker or thinner, excuse me, than 1 inch, do that. It's just easier to deal with. But I was able to get an entire sheet of this for about $25, and by entire sheet I mean like 4 feet wide by 8 feet tall, giant sheet, more than I will ever use in my life. But it was enough to make an entire dungeon, make whatever you want with it. And don't think that the only thing you can make is dungeon tiles with this. You can make gaming tables with this, you can make props, you can make pillars, you can make mountains, you can make hills, you can make all sorts of things with this material. So it's fantastic to use and buy. But these tiles are so easy to do, I felt like I would pass on, you know, the first thing that I learned to make because it was so easy to make. Now, with that being said, before I do that, I want to show off something that I just printed, and that is this. This is a texture wheel. Okay, it's basically just a 3D printed wheel that has a specific texture on it. And if you roll it over something like clay or whatever, it will take that texture. It also works on this foam. And so I'll just show you how that works really fast. Basically, you just put it on wherever you want it to be, and then you press down and you roll it into the foam as hard as you can. And there it is. Now I have a textured piece of foam that I can paint. I can make it look like a cobblestone street, and it's just incredibly easy. You know, I'm talking about how to make things easier on yourself. All you'd have to do from this point on is paint this, and then it would be ready for your tabletop. But we're talking about not having a 3D printer. You can buy those texture wheels if you want. But if you don't have those and you just want to do dungeon tiles, let's talk about how to do that. First off, I've cut out just a little 3x3 piece of this foam to work with. And what we'll do is we'll just mark it at the inch marks. You can use a pen, you can use a pencil, you can use whatever you want. The reason that I'm using a pencil is, well, we have to use it later anyway. But basically, you go through, you mark those points all the way around so that you can come back and mark them as straight lines across. Then once you have your grid, you take your X-Acto knife, you take your razor blade, you take whatever it is that you have, and you just cut lightly into the material. It doesn't need to be deep. It only needs to be, you know, 1/8 of an inch. But you want it to be, make sure it's not just an indent, that it is an actual cut. And then, taking your pencil that you marked it with before, you'll come back through and just kind of using the side of that, you'll push down as you go and just make that indent as wide as you can make it, as wide as you want to make it, really. And there you have a 3x3 grid dungeon tile. Okay, we talked about earlier using our aluminum foil. We'll just take that, roll it over the top a little bit, and now we have worn tiles. You can take your razor blade if you want, and you can cut off pieces of the tile to make it look like they're missing, like they're broken, and then the tile has some texture. And you can even draw in cracks if you want to the tile. Same thing before. I would use the razor blade first, but just kind of for showing how to do this, we'll just use that pencil. And now we have broken tiles, we have cracked tiles, we have weathered tiles. Once our tile is done, all we have left to do is paint it. So just using paint, I'm just using your standard Craftsmart hobby paint that you can buy. A bottle like this size is like $2.50 or something like that. Anyway, you're just going to take that and paint the whole thing black. Keep in mind you could go down the sides if you wanted to, just to make it look more uniform on the sides and for your players. And so you can go ahead and do that, but for the sake of what we are doing, we are just going to paint it solid black for now. And then we're going to let that dry. And we seriously have one last step to do, and we'll go over that as soon as this dries. So let's give that just a sec. Okay, now that our paint's dry, we have one last coat of paint to do on here, and we're going to do a painting technique that some of you might not have heard of, and if you haven't, it is probably one of the coolest techniques that there is for painting, and it's so simple and so easy that everyone needs to learn this. So what I've done is I got a little bit of tissue paper right here, and I put some gray in it. I put the gray that we're going to use to do our highlights on our ground tiles. And then using this brush, as you can see, this is just a makeup brush that if your wife has makeup brushes, you can find something similar to this. I like the ones with the bigger the bristle, the better when it comes to dry brushing. And basically what you're going to do is you're just going to take a little bit of this paint and you're going to get it off your brush as much as you can until there's just a little bit there. I don't know if you can see that, but it's just a really light layer of this gray. And then you know, you want your brush as dry as you can get it, right? Dry brushing. And then you're just going to go over the top of it. Back and forth, back and forth. And what this does is it will get all of the raised edges. Go here and we'll get a little bit more. Maybe a little too much right there, but that's okay. And you just go back and forth, and this gray will stick to those edges. A little too much of it right here, so I'm going to try and push it around a little bit. And then, once you're done with that, the edges will show off a lot more than they used to. And you'll have this nice, textured, colored looking like they're worn. You know, at one time the tiles might have been a nice dark black, but now they've got that gray in it. You can dry brush with whatever color you want. If you want it to be browns, you can do it with browns. But there it is. That's it. That's all it takes. That tile, for the most part, is done. You could spray coat it with some varnish on it just to keep it safe a little bit. If you were going to do the sides, you could do the sides. But for the most part, that's it. It's done. It's ready to be used. And the difference in time it takes to make to do one this big and one it takes to do this big is not a lot. It's honestly just a few extra minutes. You gotta cut all your lines and indent them and do your little patterns, but then you're done. And so, as far as if you want to learn to do your own, this is the easiest by far. It's faster than 3D printing. It is cheaper than 3D printing. You don't have to own a 3D printer to do these, and it will just bring your game to life. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the dungeon tiles, the little bits of starting terrain that I have dealt with the most. Did we talk about scatter terrain, trees and wells and different things like that? No, we didn't. And we'll go over those in time. Um, but for right now, I feel like anyone who's looking to get into D&D, this is a good place to start. Once you have your figures, whether you bought them, whether you printed them, whether you just made your own out of clay or whatever it is, you now know how to make some terrain to go with those and to bring that first dungeon to life. So go ahead and get out there and do it. And just remember, don't spend so much time making your world that you forget to spend some time in it. Until next time.